Welcome to the World Networking Podcast. Today we have Dr. Thomas Heaney joining us on the show. He has experience with the education system and a little bit of travel experience through the military and a few various other things that have piqued his interest and not piqued his interest over time. He's here to share it all with us in this exciting interview that we had. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Enjoy the pace of knowledge that comes through. He has a lot to say here, and I think it's a really cool demonstration of history living through generations. So, thank you for stopping by and enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to the World Networking Podcast. Today we have Dr. Thomas Heaney joining us with background in different educational schools and with the military, out of all things. Tom, would you like to share anything?
Sure, I've got lots to share. Where do you want to start?
Well, what's your general background?
I grew up in suburbia in Orange County in Southern California, in a small area called Fountain Valley, which was just an excuse for a whole bunch of track housing. Went to public schools from elementary, junior high, and high school, and kind of floundered around when I was in high school. Spent, I think, most of my time playing role-playing games and just kind of goofing off rather than studying, and ended up not quite knowing what to do when it was time to graduate. And so my parents said, well, you can go to community college here. And there were two community colleges right nearby. Our house was right in the middle between Golden West College and Orange Coast College.
Oh, you were in a busy spot.
Yeah. But it meant there are lots of opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they're both still there. They're both big, important schools. And I'd recommend either one of them to anyone in the Orange County area who wanted to take some classes.
That's great.
But Orange Coast College had a kind of specialty in computer science, and I had interest in computer games and computer programming. My parents had bought a couple of computers. My parents had just bought a microcomputer, a TRS-80 from Radio Shack.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so that was like, I don't know, 76, 75, somewhere in there. And they actually ended up starting a business doing word processing for students and for businesses and so forth. But I just got a tool for playing games, really early primitive computer games. And they were written in BASIC, the programming language, and they were really easy to change. You could go in and change the code. And so I started playing with that and goofing around with computer programs. So by the time I graduated in 1981, I had an interest in that. And that's what I thought, I'll get a degree in computer programming. But it was really boring and stressful and stupid in a lot of ways. At Orange Coast College, they didn't have any computer terminals. They had teletype. And they also had, my programming classes were all with IBM punch cards, which are a nightmare. You can't just write out code, and you have to write code. And if you make a mistake on the card, you have to start over again. And then you end up with this stack of several hundred little cards, and you have to stand in line to put them into the big mainframe computer. And then once it goes through the mainframe computer, you have to wait around 3 to 5 hours before you get feedback that says there's an error somewhere in your program, and you have to start figuring out what that was.
There was a lot of trial and error, like processing.
Yeah. And it was just awful. And I didn't really like the classes. And so I think I was in taking classes for 2 months before I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to do something else with my life.
How
And
old were you about then?
I turned 18 in October. My birthday is in October, so I graduated when I was 17 and um, hit 18 in October. And I told my parents, I'm going to quit school and just do something else. And they're like, well, if you quit school, you don't live here anymore. Living at home. And as cruel as that sounds, that was kind of something that
Fair.
I needed to hear. I couldn't just, goof off for the next few years, sponging off my parents. So I, kind of goofed around. I had a few friends who had joined the military. One joined the Air Force, one had joined the Navy, the Marines, and a couple had joined the Army. I don't know, there was a whole cohort of people in 1981 who were going off and joining the military. And I thought, oh, that sounds really cool. I want to do that. I want to join the Army. And because I had an interest in history, I had, read a lot of World War II history books from junior high through high school. And I thought, oh, I'll go to Europe and I'll, serve in the military, protect Western Europe from the threat of Russian communist domination, and I'll get a chance to explore and travel around Europe for free.
Yeah, it makes sense from that perspective of wanting the whole package of the experience, right?
Yeah, yeah, and in all, to be honest, I got what I wanted. I got an exciting temporary career. I got to go to Europe. I got to travel. I got to see things. I got to serve on the in what was then the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, which served along the border, and we did patrols along the east-west German border, the Iron Curtain. And that was a real eye-opening experience, to basically see what communism meant with these huge fence work and defensive positions built in, designed to keep people inside.
That's
Um,
crazy. That
yeah,
time was a very, very crazy time of history.
yeah, yeah. Um, I might have, if I had known that Ronald Reagan was going to, come close to provoking the Third World War, I might have decided not to. But it did make for an exciting stay in Europe for a year and a half, I gotta say.
You can't argue that.
But
Well,
go ahead.
was there anyone who talked you into experiencing the military? Like, did you sit down with any veterans in that time and decide like, hey, um this person had an experience that, with traveling that I would like to try.
Sort of. My uncle, my mom's sister's husband, Uncle Carl, had served 25 years in the U.S. Navy from like, I want to say the mid 50s through Vietnam and through the 70s. Um, and I got to spend a lot of summers with him, and he would take me to the Navy Yard and visit ships and go to the PX and do different things. Um, and so from him, I got the idea that, being in the military could be something worthwhile, that it's not a horrible thing. And once I joined, he set me down and said, okay, here's the stuff you need to know and the things to avoid. Um, so I had a little bit of that, but he certainly did not encourage me. Nobody was saying, hey, you should join the military, except for the recruiters.
Oh,
Once you start talking to the recruiters, they're basically a used car salesman who's, what do I need to do to get you into uniform? Uh,
they definitely are very adamant about recruits.
and they will track you down.
Oh yes, yes, I remember a lot of that in high school.
Yeah, yeah,
Even through college, some people were like, the recruiters are still calling me. It's been 2 years. It it's part of the experience, as they say.
yeah.
Out of these general backgrounds, did you have any experiences that inspired you to try teaching?
Not really until I got back from the Army. After 3 years in the military, I was sort of ready to go back to school and take it seriously, and knowing I needed to get a degree. I didn't want to continue what I had been doing. And so I went back to Orange Coast College. I changed my major like, I don't know, 5 different times. There was psychology and philosophy. I was an art major for a while, which was fun, but a lot of work. Um, and while I was at Orange Coast College, I had a number of really good instructors who were just, phenomenal, and who both made, their subjects really come alive and make them relevant to me, and with whom I made, personal connections. And I started thinking, this is kind of neat, being able to, choose a discipline that you find exciting and to share that, and the study of that discipline with students and introduce them to ideas and introduce them to an understanding of the world. I thought was pretty cool. I had not decided to become a teacher at that time, but the experience planted the seed of, eventually, when I did decide on what my career was going to be, it was, I think I really want to teach at a community college. That's just kind of the sweet spot. I didn't want to teach elementary school. That's something different. I hated high school. I had a number of really good high school teachers, but most of them were mediocre and some really terrible. And I didn't want to deal with teenagers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not for everyone.
No, it's not. And bless those who choose to, try and teach junior high or high school.
Absolutely. They're
So,
some of the most patient individuals mentally.
yes. Yeah. And to be honest, I don't have that patience.
No, I
So,
understand.
yeah.
I experienced a lot through high school with different teachers and trying to blend campuses, and it just it gets to be very exhaustive on the staff. You can just see them through the whole semester be drained.
Yeah. Um, but I did 2 years at Orange Coast College. And then, it's time to decide what to do. I had come around to deciding that philosophy because I wanted to learn about, what does the world mean and how have people in the past thought about life, the universe, and everything.
Sure.
Uh, yeah. And so, I could go anywhere for, any of the 4-year schools for that. Um, but I had happened to visit San Francisco for a few days, um, in, I think, 1985. And I was just like, this is a great city. I love this place. I think I want to live here. So I transferred to San Francisco State University, as a philosophy major. And that was a good choice. It was a good department. I learned a lot, and living in the city was pretty amazing. Going from a suburb to a real city where there's a million people packed into a rather small space was just a wonderful experience. I ended up changing my major to philosophy and religion, which sounds, ooh, that's really intellectual. You must know a lot. Um, it was this kind of squishy major that San Francisco State University invented in the early 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and basically you could take any class, you could assemble your own major, and you just had to write a paragraph about how this class applied to this particular field. And that allowed me to avoid the math requirements for philosophy. You had to take like high levels of calculus, and I was like, oh crap, I'm not prepared for this. Math is not my best suit. Uh,
I didn't know that about philosophy, that
Yeah,
they require
neither did
calculus.
I should have read the course catalog a little better. So there's a lesson for your listeners. When you pick a major, go and study what's required for that major.
No kidding.
Before,
Read the fine print.
yeah. Um, But it was great because I was able to pick and choose a whole bunch of different classes and take courses on the history of science, the history of religion, the history of philosophy, and really kind of weave them all together. Um, and unbeknownst to myself, I was creating a degree that was actually about, history, not really philosophy or religion. It was really a history degree, just with a fancier name.
You were building the foundation to your current career,
Yeah,
and you just didn't know.
as I said earlier, I love history, and so I basically fell back in love with the study of history on a broader scope. Um, but while living in San Francisco, I met a girl, and we fell in love. And kind of fast forwarding here, she decided to move back to her hometown, which is Sacramento. And I was like, well, I want to move in with you. So that means I have to move to Sacramento as well. And once I got there, I'm like, okay, now what do I do? She got me a job, a kind of low-level job at the place she was working. And I thought, well, I want to continue my studies. So I went to Sacramento State University, and I was going to major in either philosophy or humanities, but neither one of those really was going to work out. Um, so I thought, well, I'll take some, courses in the history department, and they were great. They were just fascinating courses. I took a upper division course in warfare in it was modern warfare, warfare since 1500. That was just a fascinating class.
Oh,
At the
I'd
same
love to take that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great class. The instructor was just, kind of spellbinding in his lectures and weaving all these different things together. Part of what you did in the class was everybody in the class was assigned a role in a particular Napoleonic country. And he ran this massive war game, 1807 to 1807, 1805 to 1807.
Wow.
Napoleonic Wars.
And were
And,
you set to replicate the diplomacy, or were
yeah,
you?
and you kind of had to do everything. The big countries like France and England, they got two military commanders, two navy commanders, a diplomat, and then like a scribe. And I ended up getting stuck with Spain. I'm not sure how I got Spain, but there you go. Um, and the other people in my group all dropped the class. And so I was stuck doing all of these different roles for Spain by itself, including a lot of diplomacy. And it was absolutely fascinating because I had to go and talk to the French, and I had to talk to the English and cut deals with these people and move troops. So that was a really neat experience. And I
Sounds
started,
like it.
this is what I want to do. I want to teach history. I want to do this sort of thing.
Have you taken a note from that book and tried to do anything like that with your classes?
I have, with far lower rate of success, quite
It's
frankly.
tricky.
Yeah. Um, in that class, it was a military history course, and it was upper division. So you could sort of ask more of students, throw more stuff at them, and expect them to keep up with the work. Um, and most of the courses I teach at Feather River College are the lower division survey courses, the U.S. history from colonial to 1877, and the U.S. history, the second half from the Civil War to the present. And then I get to teach a couple of other classes. But these huge general studies courses aren't quite designed to do something like that, which doesn't keep me from trying different things. Um, I've got a number of online games that I have students that they can access that I've programmed that are much smaller in scope. It's instead of doing something over a period of half the semester where we're doing something every day, it's here, go do this for a few hours.
And
Um,
those games that you designed, I believe the French Revolution was one, correct?
right. which is what I've done is I've taken a board game designed by another person, by a game designer, and it was published about 10 years ago. And I contacted him and said, "Hey, would you mind if I, basically made a web based version of this for, not just my classes, but for teachers and students?" And he said that would be great. And it took a while, but I was able to create basically a version of it that's free, it's playable, it's relatively accessible by students. The downside is I'm not teaching any classes where I study the French Revolution, so I don't even get to use it. But it's
Oh,
for anybody around the world who would like to play it or use it in their classrooms.
that is really neat. And that's a cool aspect of education, right? You're able to share in the modern age. We're able to access so much media that having connections with other schools is a practical thing to do. Make things like that and tools that people can utilize elsewhere that helps serve a purpose outside of your campus.
Absolutely. And, it's just part of a whole kind of revolution in teaching and the internet and historical research that has taken off not just because of the internet, but in particular because of COVID, when everybody had to switch to, distance learning for a year or two. Everyone was like, well, now what do I do in my classes? And lots of people, including myself and including um, state and federal institutions, said, hey, why don't we make all of this available, that you can have students go and read things online, look at historical documents, or play games, or look at all sorts of things. So there's just a tremendous transformation in learning. I think that's really happening these days.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There's a big shift in how college is being viewed in society. And I think a lot of people generally acknowledge it as a necessary thing. For high level learning, you have to have colleges, right? But the way we format how people find interest with different academic courses is unfortunate because there's a lot of disconnect with how things can be useful to you in the life setting. I think a lot of people view um, history, for instance, or even science courses at times as a waste because they're not going to actively use it, right? But they use it actively more than they realize. That's the whole point of studying and gaining information. There's there's like a collective you start to understand from what's happened in the past and what you can gain from in the future. I think that if people viewed that more openly, they would have more fun with creating things that others can understand and possibly gain information from as well. Like
Mm.
the collaborative nature of school, I think, is the best thing about going to school.
Yeah, one of my favorite, uh, something that I experienced as a student, and one of my favorite things when I see it happening in my students or students at the college, is when they start to cross the beams, to borrow from Ghostbusters, and they start realizing, oh, the stuff that I'm learning in this class has these connections to this other class, which I could then write about in my English class, and allows me to see this other thing. Um, and the students are taking my history class, they're taking economics, they're taking physical geography and learning about how climate and environment shapes human civilizations, and then they see that in action in my class. And I mean, we all, you go to college to get a degree, to get the skills that you need to get a job so that you can earn more money. But the secret mission of college is to build in people this body of knowledge and skills for seeing the world and understanding it and understanding their place in it and how things work. And hopefully that also provides a basis for continued lifelong learning. We use that term a lot in community college, and we really mean it. That's what we're hoping people do. So,
Absolutely. And I think it's a really cool experience that you're able to have being on that side of seeing those beams cross. I love that interpretation. But there's a lot of truth to that, right?
yeah,
Things collaborate in the real world situations. I mean, taxes and work, that's a common one we all know. There's government involvement with your career. So there's naturally going to be things you have to keep tabs on and you have to balance around. And college is a great way to help you build that responsibility, that discipline that you need to gain ground in your career. And I think that's something people need in some cases. Like I've talked to a lot of people about this. It's not everyone goes into the trades, but trades is a good career. But some people need something structured where they spring off of an education first, or even the grounds of gaining that education and the network that they gain from that experience as a whole helps them to understand, like, this is my potential. This is where I can be in 30 years if I spend time and dedicate time to invest into my knowledge.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think being on that other side is just as important. There's a lot of people that don't consider ever being a teacher, and a lot of teachers I've talked to, that was never their first thought. That, oh, I wouldn't be on the teaching end. I was a student. Being a student was hard enough, but then they end up being teachers and they keep teaching because it's something that they learn from continuously, and they gain a stronger bond with the education that they teach. And I think that's really what society needs at the root. It's people who spend the time to respect the knowledge that we've gained over a span of generations.
Yeah, I'm not sure quite where to go with that.
I know it's
Um,
a big
it,
comment.
yeah, it's very big. Um, and not that people who don't go to college aren't learning about the world and so forth. Um, I think your thing about the trades is a really important one. Um, I've got a couple of nephews. I've my, where am I going with this? I've got some nephews, some of whom have struggled in school. They just barely got through high school, and ended up going in different routes. And one of them is becoming a plumber, which meant that he did have to go to school and do, basically some work there. But most of his work is as an apprentice. And the thing with that is he's making good money now. And when he finishes and passes his tests and becomes a full-fledged plumber, um, he's going to make a lot of money. I think he's maybe making more than I am. And so he's also, learning about the world in a different, more physical way. I know a lot of people who don't like reading and don't like learning through reading, but reading is just one method of learning. There are lots of different ones. It's not like if you don't like reading, there's still a whole bunch of stuff out there to help you learn from, like podcasts.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's one form I've loved to dive into myself. I have a little bit of trouble focusing on a book for a long period of time. I tend to get pulled. I have a lot of interests, so I
Mm-hmm.
and I've learned over time. Like I am slowly realizing that it's probably ADD because I just that trickiness to focus has always been a thing, even through elementary school and high school. It got better in high school because I had more discipline to grind through content, but I noticed it a lot growing up that it was hard without having a visualization or a hands-on experience to really connect fully to the project I was working on, and that's coming from someone who loves to creatively write. Like I love poetry, I love um, the arts, but formal writing is a whole different beast from creative writing, and I learned that quite well through high school.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to express yourself, or write a poem or a short story or just an essay about a particular topic that's on your mind, or that you're seeing and experiencing, is a lot different than being told, all right, you're reading this short story by this author and you're going to do a character analysis of this and it's due tomorrow night. Those are
Yes,
very different. They both involve writing, but they're completely different tasks, and one can be a lot more fun than the other one.
absolutely. And it takes a certain person, uh, and there's some people that end up wanting to teach those kinds of classes, and we need those people. We need a balance. So that's the aspect that I miss about not being in college, um, or from not being in college. I really enjoyed the networking that I gained through talking to teachers and staff like such as yourself. Really, where you're able to come to someone who's approachable and just take some time to talk over, study problems and different information that might help format things easier and manage things easier. Like that's that's really the golden ticket right there to me
Mhm.
is having those moments where, oh, this person's human, this person's like me, they went through these struggles. Like we can manage if we work together, teacher and student.
Yeah, and learn and get through the material in that manner, and help prepare for any future obstacles or opportunities as well. Um, yeah, I wish I had taken advantage of office hours and getting to know instructors a bit more than I did. I usually and I experience students come to me when they're in trouble, and so that tended to be the only time I saw my went to office hours was, okay, I got a D minus on this last exam. What do I need to do now?
Yeah,
Um, um,
emergency situations.
yeah, and I can remember going with those problems and at least experiencing um, problem solving. And when you leave the office, it's like, okay, I know I can make it through this class. Here's what I need to do, um, and being sort of reinvigorated. Um, and I have really specific memories of exactly that. Um, and keep in mind that uh, most teachers and professors have failed classes and have had struggles of their own. If you're studying and you're struggling, it's not you. That's the nature of learning, and some things are going to be easier than other things. Math is really hard for me, but writing and reading are pretty easy. So everybody's got different skills and different interests, and we need to
That's
recognize that we all have these, and we all have struggles and obstacles to overcome.
that's a great point. and a lot of people doubt themselves and their capabilities, and I've talked to a lot of people over the last year who struggled with a lot of depression over getting through the last years of high school, and it is tough. It's tough on a lot of people, to especially pick a direction to fly with. You can be curious all you want, but you don't know until you try. And
Ex- yeah.
there's just a lot of truth to that. Like, and something I wanted to actually run by you was, um, how did you dedicate so much time to your studies?
Well, and to be honest, the number one is that the woman I fell in love with and moved in with in Sacramento. We got married, and we're still married. We just celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary, and
Congratulations.
yeah, and oddly enough, she ex- she experienced some things like I did with trying to go to college. She was told, you go to college, that's what you're supposed to do. And she really struggled with that. And she had decided, you know what? I'm not going to college. I'm just going to go straight into the workforce. I've got great people skills, and I can, get a decent job and do that. So she did that, which allowed her to pay for a lot of the bills, and that meant that I could go to school full time. So I got lucky in having a partner who was able to support me, and get me through a lot of that. And eventually she matured and realized, okay, I think I can go to school now. And so she was able to proceed through, and we both graduated from the University of California, Irvine at almost the same time. Um, and so I benefited from her being able to support me. Um, and at the same time, she demonstrated that, sometimes college isn't for everybody when they're really young, and it's later on when you realize, oh, I'm ready, I'm going to return to the classroom, and you can really excel and learn in ways that you might not have been able to learn 5 or 10 years before.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to experience that ties into education. This is one thing I'm a big proprietor for, is um, that education doesn't outweigh experience, but experience doesn't outweigh education. You have to have this collaboration of the two to fully gain the understanding.
Yeah, precisely. Um, so, after I got my master's degree at Sacramento State University, um, there were very few jobs available for anybody with a master's degree in history. There was just a recession going on, and the state of California wasn't hiring anybody. And my mentor at Sacramento State said, "Hey, you should probably go and get a PhD. You should become a historian and a history professor, and so that's what you should do." And I ended up transferring to University of California, Irvine, to pursue my PhD, and we moved down there. And that gave me a lot of skills. And in your point of how did I get through my studies, when you're in a graduate program, you're in the graduate program because you find that topic fascinating and you find everything about it interesting. And I suffer from ADHD. Well, what was ADHD? ADD now. And there's there's very often two sides to that. We're easily distracted. We have difficulty focusing on a task, completing that task. I still have so much trouble completing tasks, just
I
getting
understand.
it done. But at the same time, very often we'll have these little niche things that when we're working on that, time doesn't exist. The rest of the world doesn't exist. We just do that thing. Um, and until somebody wakes us up and says, okay, you need to stop working on that, work on this stuff that you don't like. And then all those distractions come up and you can't get anywhere. So when it comes to history, I'm fascinated by, studying it in all sorts of different ways. And so the schoolwork itself wasn't really that difficult, except there are times where you are studying something you don't want to be studying, and you have to write a 35-page paper on a topic you have no interest in. That is really hard to do.
No kidding. It
Yeah.
sounds like having clarity in the situation too, like going in and understanding I'm gonna have to balance this. I'm gonna have to face the necessary evils that I don't necessarily want. And that's part of learning how to appreciate the good. I think that's because not every day is gonna be free of complication. There's
Mm-hmm.
gonna be challenges every day, but when you have a good positive perspective for the content you're going into, that seems to be a very beneficial aspect that I've learned to value more as I've gotten older.
Yeah. There was an advisor at Feather River College who had a poster, a motivational poster that, normally they're pretty dumb, but it had the phrase, discipline is remembering what it is that you want. And it's like, I wish I had that, on my apartment wall when I was going to school, that, you set your goal for something. I want to have these skills. I want to go into this particular profession, or I want to do this business or whatever. And keeping your eye focused on that can help build the discipline necessary to get through the crap and the obstacles and the other things that you have to do in order to get that degree or that certificate or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you get through it, and everybody hates those tasks, but you can get it done, and then you can move on to the things that you do like.
Oh, I think that's great advice, and I honestly agree. I really do. Stepping back a little bit though, um, I know we dove deep into the college side of things, so I wanted to step into what jobs you were a part of growing up.
Well, let's see. My very first job, because I floundered around in high school, and at least for a while, it didn't look like I was going to be heading for college. Um, I actually had a counselor who said, you really need to focus on just getting your diploma because there's no chance you're going to be successful in college.
Oh man.
Yeah, the classic thing that a counselor says that turns out to be completely wrong. But at the time, so I went into, what is it called? The technical professional programs at my high school. What jobs can you get into right out of high school? And one of them was sales. You should go into sales and retail. And so I got a job at a hobby store near where I lived, selling, cashier and stocking and learning all those skills, which was actually pretty cool. I was really into, history models and model trains, and that's what they sold. So that was neat.
That is really neat.
Yeah. But I left that job and got a job as a gas jockey. That is working at a gas station, pumping gasoline into people's cars, which was a really weird job.
A lot of people tend to hate that one. They rate it one of the worst.
Yeah. You're, the number of times you get robbed or that some sort of crime happens to you that is just so regular, it's kind of depressing. And not that I was, shot or beaten up or anything. It was all nonviolent theft crime, but just kind of continuous. And it was at a time when gas prices were spiking because of the Iranian hostage situation and in the Middle East. So everybody was mad, at whoever was pumping the gas. They were mad at that person. So
Good.
that was not great. Got a job as a parking lot attendant. That was a boring job, but I had a lot of time to study, so that was cool. Also, I've worked at a number of movie theaters, and that's a job I recommend. If you have to be in retail, working at a movie theater is probably okay. You get to interact with the public, but the public tends to be excited. They're happy to be out and seeing a movie. They're going to complain about the popcorn prices, but it's all fun, and so everybody's in a good mood. There's a fair amount of downtime, so you can spend that either studying or socializing with the other employees at the theater. So I met and made a lot of friends, including my wife, in the movie theater, and that allowed me to study a lot. You get paid to study. That's cool. So I'd recommend.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that's a good gig.
The military is also a job, which I don't necessarily recommend as a career, but it is something that one can consider.
What's the biggest aspect that you would say holds you back from fully recommending it as a career, other than the obviously, like, the violent aspect? No one wishes a war, right? But
right.
It, and I've always heard the mental aspect of just going through and the system of how your rank is, and it's just kind of, there's almost like a toxic aspect to some of the culture of the military. And then I don't know if that's something you experienced directly, where you were like, this is just not for me.
Yeah. First, you do have the possibility of war. It's unlikely, but that is something that you have to accept when you're joining. But pretty much most of the work itself is going to be dangerous. If you sort of pay attention to the news, training accidents happen all the time, and whether it's a tank that rolls over and kills everybody on board, or a helicopter that crashes, or somebody drops a grenade, there are just so many terrible ways to be injured or die without wartime. They are dangerous jobs, and you have to be aware of that and be prepared for that. But the military itself, I've been in toxic military environments, but I've been in good military environments. But the military itself is just so weird. It's just so totally different from ordinary life, because you're basically under control of somebody or a group of people 24/7. You can't do anything without somebody's permission, essentially, or without scheduling a specific time, and that at any moment you might be ordered to do something, and it's just completely bizarre. And there's also, I think when I was in the military in the early 80s, the Army in particular was undergoing a transformation. It's the Vietnam War had ended, and the draft had ended, and the military was switching to a full 100% professional military, people who were going to volunteer. And to move away from wars like Vietnam, counterinsurgency, anti-guerrilla type wars. And it was at a time when the Army was basically trying to figure out, okay, what is it that we're supposed to be doing? And I can give you a couple of examples. When I joined up, went to basic training in January 1982 in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and it was freaking cold. I'm from Southern California. I'd never been in a winter environment where everything was frozen for months. And so that was just bizarre in and of itself. But we did what they did in the movies, 5 o'clock, long before dawn, before the sun comes up, you're lacing on your combat boots and your fatigues, and you go out for physical training and you do 1,000 push-ups and then you run 6 miles in your combat boots, in your fatigues. About 6 weeks into training, the Army said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. Everybody, you now get sneakers. We're giving you running shoes, or you could buy your own running shoes. And you're not running in fatigues, you're running in shorts or in your gym clothes. You wore literally real gym clothes. Why was that changed? The Army realized they were spending so much money paying for injured soldiers' feet because running in boots is a stupid idea. But they had done it for 100 years, so that's what the Army did. So you literally have the beginning of the Army going, what do we need to do to produce good quality soldiers whom we want to take care of because they're actual human beings and we'd like them to do a good job and maybe, re-enlist and not run away from the Army. And how can we care for them? And so there was this whole transformation that you could see step by step through the 80s that the military made.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody's written a dissertation or a book on it, but I think there's that topic is available there. When my most recent nephew, was it about 8 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, he went active. He went to basic training, and they had a program where they shared, they had somebody taking pictures of everybody doing their everyday training and practice and physical education. And then they posted that to Facebook. And so we, the family members, could follow him through his training on Facebook and see pictures of either him or his classmates, throwing grenades or learning to handle an M4 on the rifle range. And you could see how much care the Army had taken to ensure everyone's safety. Everyone's wearing safety glasses. Everyone, if you're using firearms, you have ear protection. They had a lot of people who were there watching them and caring for them. That didn't exist when I was in the Army. In the in the early 80s, it was, we don't care if you get your eye shot out. And gradually they realized we need to care for soldiers. And that in and of itself was just a transformation. And you can really see that. You can compare, the year 2000 to 30 years before.
Yeah, that's something I didn't really consider. It's a big aspect of the military, actually, is how it's been modernized to meet the demands of a society that expects more from its value to the personnel. And
yeah,
it's changed in the politics. I mean, that's why boots on the ground is such a controversial topic. It's not like the Vietnam era where, people are trying to send soldiers everywhere to establish peace, right? I think we've realized that doesn't work very well. In certain situations, at least.
Yeah, the military, whether it's the Air Force or Space Force or the Marines or everybody else, they have different abilities and tools, and the military is one tool that the federal government has. But landing troops everywhere all the time turns out not to be the best approach.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Yeah, it's not cheap in money or in lives, and that there are various alternatives. sometimes those are alternative issues. Just recently, President Biden put further restrictions on the use of drones in Syria. And sometimes we go, wait, we still have drones in Syria? We still have forces, but they're very small in number. They're working with much more closely with local people like the Kurds. So it's a very different kind of tool than, let's send the airborne division in on helicopters to smash the enemy, and that turns out not to work all the time.
No, it's it's a change for the better in some aspects, and in some perspectives. It's there's always going to be two sides to history, as they say. But
or a lot more than two sides.
True. That's very true. But something I wanted to touch base on was did the military send you to any schools during that time?
No, that's a short answer. Besides basic and armor crewman training, those were pretty much the only schools that I was sent to. If I had stayed in longer, if I had reenlisted, I certainly would have been sent to, there's all sorts of layers for non-commissioned officers to gradually gain skills, and you become a corporal and then a sergeant and then a staff sergeant and work your way up. But I wasn't able to take advantage of those. The closest I got was one unit that I was in Germany was really good, and I really liked the platoon sergeant and the platoon leader, and all the way up to the captain. It was just a really well-led organization, and I was preparing to rotate back to the States. You basically served a year and a half in overseas, and then you were supposed to go back to the States. And my platoon leader said, you've demonstrated that you're really smart. You do have an interest in going back to school. There's this new program to send enlisted men to college and then have them come back and go to officer cadet school and then serve as a commissioned officer. And he wanted to he said, if you agree to stick around for another year in our unit, I'll recommend you for that. And I was really tempted, but I decided not to do that. But certainly that is something that I think people could expect. And you can also take courses while you can go to school while you're in the military.
From other colleges and stuff like that.
Yeah, famously, the University of Maryland had almost a monopoly on that for a couple of decades. But pretty much everywhere I was stationed, you had the opportunity to sign up for U.S. history or freshman composition or almost anything, either as a correspondence course or as a face-to-face course on your base. And very often the Army would pay the tuition for that. I tried to take a number of courses and none of them really worked out, but that was just circumstances. So there are opportunities in the military, and then of course when I got out, I was able to use the GI Bill, and I had put money into an account, and the Uncle Sam put matching money into that. So when I came out and went to school full time, I was able to. I only had to work part-time for several years because I had that money to support my college education.
Yeah, absolutely. And 3 years is nothing to laugh at. That's a long time. But in retrospect, like with all the college that you've done, I'm sure you were happy that you invested a little time working and building a nest egg like that so you could be more comfortable during your academics.
Yeah, I think it did help a lot, especially when I moved to San Francisco.
Oh yeah.
it wasn't that expensive to live in the 1980s, but it was more expensive than, living at my parents' house and going to a local school.
Very true. Yeah, very true. And I was curious about the armored. You said armored crewman training.
Right.
How was that? Was there anything in that that you really remember sticking out?
Well, how many hours have we got here? That's another aspect of, the military. Like I said, it's so different and so weird. It's like being in a kind of, not a dream state, but a kind of a state where everything's sort of more vivid. My memories of being in the Army are in some ways more sharp than what I've been doing this summer. It just takes on a kind of rarefied air, and affects you differently, so that I can remember how many times I banged my head inside the turret of my M60A3 main battle tank.
Yeah.
But choosing combat arms, and specifically armor crewmen, did open some doors. Whereas if I'd gone into being a clerk or computers or something, I would have been stuck indoors. I got to be, out doing more exciting things, sometimes in the rain and the snow, but generally they were fascinating. They felt worthwhile. I spent many hours in a watchtower overlooking the East-West German border. And we had to sit there and catalog whatever it was that the Russians or the East Germans were doing and report them back, just in case there was some sort of information, a signal that they were getting ready to invade Western Europe or something.
And
Nothing.
that's something you were actually stationed actively in a watchtower, though.
Yeah. And, I can almost smell the air, and picture myself at 2 a.m. back in the tower, listening to the static on the radio, and the terrible coffee that we're all drinking to stay awake. But it felt like work that meant something.
Yeah.
And so that was really fascinating. Besides the fact that tanks are very dangerous machines, and they're very large, and you can get into all sorts of trouble with them, whether that's getting stuck, accidentally wedging your tank in an alleyway of a medieval city in Germany, and knowing that the only way to get unstuck is to keep driving forward, and you're going to be destroying these walls that maybe had been there for 800 or 1,000 years. But your problem, you've got orders. You have to do this. It turns out that you think that these machines are, they have huge treads and massive diesel engines that they could get anywhere and go anywhere. Until you're driving one down a road in the middle of winter, and it's all black ice, and you lose all traction, and you're now just riding a 57-ton bobsled, and you have no control, and you're going 30, 35 miles an hour down this road, and you're hoping that you don't kill anyone.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah. Being in the military gives you all these really weird experiences, even if nobody's actually shooting at you.
No kidding. Yeah, there's plenty to be learned from off wars.
Yeah.
That's super fascinating, though. I appreciate you sharing that. I
Sure.
would really like to ask if you have had any different experiences traveling. Did you go anywhere else while you were enlisted, or have you gone since after being out of the military?
Funnily enough, haven't been back to Europe since I returned from Germany, decades ago. But we keep planning on it. We've been, saving up money and points on our credit cards We were supposed to go to Europe last year, and then we had some emergency things that came up, and we had to postpone that. So we're still hoping to get over there at some point. But while I was in Europe, I did get to travel. I got to go to Copenhagen and Venice. I took a couple of weeks of leave and just took trains around the central part of Europe and then went to London. That's a really happening city, really good food and all sorts of history and strange things to do. So I did get to get around as not as much as I really should have, but substantially in Europe, and so I felt pretty good about that. And I don't know, the end of my answer there. So yeah, it is possible to go and travel while you're in the military and take advantage of those situations.
Yeah, no, it's completely fair. And I know a lot of people, that's their main draw is just that travel experience because it's so expensive. It's such a distance to get to Europe from the States. It's no small feat.
Yeah, and to be able to stay there for a while and travel on the weekends, there's always something to do. I did get a little bit lucky. One of the units I was in Germany, the first sergeant's wife was a German tourist travel agent. And so what she did was she put together packages, and everybody in the company got this incredible discounts for traveling. And they'd be, bus travel by 3 or 4 days to go visit someplace. But still, it was really, really cool for just a few dollars to be able to go down to Venice for 4 days.
No kidding. Yeah, that's a really cool deal. Something that ties into all this and through your travel and teaching with people, have you seen like a profound effect that social media has had on society? Do you feel like it's helped society progress in a more positive form?
It's as it is with every new technology that comes along. There's great, wonderful things, and there are not great, wonderful things. Now that we have social media, I'm at least until recently a big Twitter guy. I love being on Twitter and being able to interact with a whole bunch of different people who provide me with all sorts of different perspectives on things. I think that's just really cool. And I've learned so much on that particular media, on that app. There's all sorts of technologies, like I mentioned, the National Archives, the Library of Congress. There's all sorts of materials now that are available and different ways of sharing it and exploring it. That's just great. But it also allows people to spread misinformation or outright lies or really bizarre conspiracy theories, and to quickly project that information out. And there are lots of people who, maliciously want to share that information, that misinformation, and lots of people who don't know any better or don't really understand what it is that they're seeing, who latch on to these, whether it's QAnon, or whatever thing that people are saying on Facebook or on Twitter and spreading misinformation. Whether it's about Ukraine or COVID or race or whatever. It's really difficult to fight against that.
It's true.
It'll pop up in the classroom. That people have they're coming to the class with various misunderstandings about the history because they've latched onto this social media or that social media and have been fed a lot of information that's very wrong, and I have to fight against that.
So in a sense, your role in society helps to battle against misinformation.
I like to think that I'm able to battle against misinformation. I'm not totally sure how effective that is. Um, One of the things I do in most of my American history classes is right at the beginning of the semester, I give everyone a little survey. It's kind of a miniature quiz, but it's anonymous. And it's about basic questions about the American Civil War. What's the cause of the American Civil War? Did Abraham Lincoln own slaves? Did slaves in the South support the Confederacy? Just these, what should be sort of basic concepts that people have. And I use that because I'm able to take the information that the students give me and then turn that into a presentation about how wrong the ideas that they have are. The majority of students think Abraham Lincoln was a slave owner because that's what they learned on social media. He's not. He, never owned slaves. His family didn't own slaves. He didn't want to
Yeah.
own slaves. But people have this perception. And similarly with the idea that there are slaves in the Confederate Army fighting against the United States to maintain the Confederacy. That's completely not true, but they learned that on social media. And so
Yep.
they think that's what's real, not what they're learning in class.
No, that's a good point to bring up. There's a lot of people that don't fact check enough. You really do have to follow your sources. If you don't have a source, there's a good chance the source isn't credible.
Yeah, checking your sources is very important, as is perhaps having a basic, well-rounded knowledge of something, and being skeptical of anything that comes along that counteracts that. Um, and being able to respond and go, wait a minute, this doesn't sound quite right. There's something wrong here. Um,
Yeah,
but
that's important.
yeah, I'm done with that.
No worries. I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah.
Um, were there any times you felt as if it was a waste of time, or have all these experiences accumulated to form a solid foundation for your teachings? And if so, like what schools do you feel like you gained the most positives from?
Uh, um, I think all the schools that I've attended have been useful. I've been able to go to and teach at the community college, the CSU, and the UCs. And I found, all of them to be filled with instructors who cared about their topics, who cared about their students. Some of the instructors were better teachers than others, but that's just the way of things, particularly at the UC level, where most of the emphasis is on doing research.
With the active life of the outdoors coming up, people are looking to be out and about more. Sasquatch Farms CBD brings organically grown products in the Sierra Nevadas from the soil to the people. Farmer John has worked on green projects on the farm since 2013. He looks forward to providing you with the highest quality soaps, salves, CBD tinctures, pre-rolls, along with some other fresh products. It takes a community in farming to survive, so any efforts made to support our farmers in the world helps to support our society as a whole. So remember, if you can't catch him out on the farmers market, catch him online at SasquatchFarmsCBD.com. That's SasquatchFarmsCBD.com. Thank you. Now back to the show.
And if anyone is considering, well, should I go to a UC or should I go to a CSU or should I start at the community college? They're all great ideas. They're all excellent institutions, and will give you what you need. I do tend to say going the community college route is a good idea because it helps you kind of start out without spending too much money. You can even start out doing part-time and get your feet wet and get ready to take more classes as you progress in your skill level. So that's a big thing. But there's nothing wrong with just jumping in and choosing a college and going straight to it. You know my son Benjamin. He recently graduated from CSU Sonoma, and he made the decision to go straight there and attend that school all the way through rather than go to Feather River College, and that worked well for him.
Yeah, he really did trial by fire. He loaded himself up the first few semesters, and I know that.
Setting aside the whole music department thing, which was in retrospect a little bit of a fiasco, but it did, what's the phrase? Hardship builds character.
Absolutely.
So, there's that. But I generally enjoy learning. And even though there were some classes where I just was smashing my head against a wall and were really frustrated with, there were only a few moments where I was like, I'm going to give up on this. Working on a PhD is a big deal. It takes more years than it does. Doing a master's degree can take you a year, 2, 3 years, and you can kind of get through it. But when you get to the PhD level, there's so much just long slogs of work that have to be done. And you do have moments where you're like, is this really for me? Do I really need a PhD, or could I just go get a job right now?
Yeah.
And about I think more than half of my cohort who went to USC ended up dropping out. And they all did fine. They all found jobs that they liked doing interesting things. So sometimes quitting is not a terrible thing. Also, I did find that taking a withdrawing from a class when you just can't take it anymore, when you're starting to really flounder, is not a bad thing. Sometimes quitting is okay. And I was doing my master's work, and I was taking this class from this one instructor who just seemed completely insane. The amount of reading she was requiring and the amount of writing, and it was a topic that I did not know. And I was trying to work full time at the time, and I was, like, I can't do this anymore. And so, I should say, very often you can simply drop a class. It's pretty easy. You just go and you click on it, or you turn in a card and you drop the class. At the time at Sacramento State, you had to go through a whole bunch of doors, a whole bunch of gates before you got to withdraw from a class. And I had to convince the instructor to let me go. And she did. And I was able to continue my studies. And a couple of semesters later, I had to still take that class. I had to face that class. But I had built up the skills necessary, and I realized I can't work full time and do this class. So I took, I worked part-time for a semester, and I was able to take the class. And the instructor turned out to be wonderful, and I learned a lot. But I did need to build up my skills and my discipline further. So sometimes quitting selectively is an option.
I think that's a great take on that aspect of college. A lot of people find pride in getting through a class, and I know it's tough to take your losses, but
yeah, and students should feel pride in completing classes successfully and learning things, but sometimes you just have to cut bait and run in order to succeed elsewhere. So
absolutely.
Yeah, you just have to be kind of selective in what you're doing.
Oh, and that ties back with what aspect I was talking about earlier with people going to college and maybe not having the discipline they want to achieve in life. They go to college to gain some of that rapport, the discipline, and just the perspective of what disciplines they need to work on within themselves, and that's part of it. Like maybe focusing on the grittier stuff that you're reluctant to focus on means that you have to cut and withdraw from that extra course that you really like to take, but you just don't have the time to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I totally agree though. It's very important to have balance. If you can't have balance, then you can't function.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you can go without balance for short periods of time. Maybe you kind of have to make that decision. You go, can I push through and get this done, or do I need to just let this go and take care of myself? And because you don't want to break yourself, but know that you can succeed and climb over those obstacles that otherwise seem insurmountable.
Yes, that's great advice for people struggling, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Like, and you're right. There's times you can fall out of balance and make it work. Like losing sleep is a common one.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But
Yeah.
there's plenty of people that lost sleep and are okay. They're working. They're upright. So it comes to how much you know yourself. And of course I've only taken so much school. I haven't gone to the higher academic level like that. But I do know to a degree that humans are relatively similar in nature, and having humans that have a lack of sleep in the same room together doesn't always end up with the prettiest discussions. So keeping in mind that we're all human and that we all struggle with keeping with the day-to-day tasks, it's important, to build a good team and a good network.
Yeah, people who are going to support you, people who can provide you with insights and information and guidance. Along those lines, I think there's been a little bit of a revolution. I think maybe I'm using that term too much, but in mental health, particularly for young people, um, that when I was going to school as a young person, there was zero. Mental health was not a thing. It was just keep plowing forward. If you don't like it, then you can quit. And I think perhaps COVID had an influence on this, but it's also a generational thing, that institutions are taking students' mental health, young person's mental health, more seriously. And students themselves, young people themselves, are recognizing the value of it.
I would
And I've,
agree.
yeah, just on campus at Feather River College, um, the college was able to take advantage of a grant from the county and work with the county and start funding an on-campus mental health specialist, somebody who can meet with students and help them through their crises, and recognize that students have these crises and they shouldn't face them on their own, nor should
No.
you leave students floundering until they're in crisis.
Yes.
And that's gradually built up so that now we have a we have a whole wellness center, and we have a full-time staff. Plus, we have online support and telephone support for students, and students take advantage of it. I've spoken to students. I've secretly overheard students talking about mental health and working with their therapist and working with one another. And it's really a cool thing that we recognize that you shouldn't face these problems alone. If you're facing crises or struggles, it's not you. There are ways of getting through this and building the skills that you need or getting the help that you need to get through that. And I'm proud of our institution that it's done that, but I'm also in admiration of younger people who are recognizing this importance of this particular aspect of society.
I think that's a great frame to set because mental health has definitely become more of a hot topic with social media, and I think that's one of the positives is you're able to see. But the thing is, you have to have discipline to get off of the social media when you know that you probably have spent too much time on it. It's and people dwell, and people like to dwell on things that they know.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be good, that can be bad. A lot of the times, politics is one thing people dwell on, and they take an emotional responsibility from what's politically happening around them, and that's not healthy. It's not healthy to do all the time. You have to have a step back and realize that there's only so much in your control and your scope, and you have to have an understanding that if you are going to affect anything politically, you have to first build your foundation, and building that mental health around what matters. Am I healthy? Am I um, actually doing what I need to be doing in my life to make a balance with my relationships? These are important aspects that people tend to throw out of the window when they're upset.
Yeah, absolutely. And you start to, it's bad enough to wake up in the middle of the night and then remember something that is upsetting you, and then you start thinking about it some more, and thinking about it some more, and thinking about it some more, and then you're up for 2 hours going, um, that's bad enough. We don't need to be doing that during our waking hours and going on to, Facebook or Instagram and going, oh, this person is really aggravating me, and I'm just going to come get into a fight with them. And I say that as somebody who does occasionally like to get into fights on Twitter and Facebook. But yeah, you need to sometimes break off from that and walk away and realize that's not that important. I can just let it go.
Yep, and I understand that. I've also done the same thing on social media. It's why I took a step back for a long time, because I realized what it was doing to me and my mindset, and I realized I was falling into negative habits too many times versus positive ones. And I don't want to be a negative person. I really do have a positive view towards life and what it has to offer, or what there is to be shared, and there's a lot of value to that. So creating sharing negative experiences out in the world out in the world isn't helping anyone else to understand that perspective, the beauty of life. So I want to put out something better than what I'm maybe receiving, and I think that's the individual responsibility when you want to share positivity. Is you have to take punches sometimes and step back and realize that someone's doing this because they're hurt. Someone's doing this because they're maybe not as educated about a situation as I am. And that's not necessarily their fault if they didn't have the same experience or access to experiences that I had.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's well said.
Thank you. And I think something that would roll into this well would be this question here that we have is, what would you say was the biggest struggle to overcome throughout your life experiences? Did you ever carry major self-doubts? And what would you recommend to anyone struggling with mental health, trying to study a major, or investing time in a career?
Huh. I'm not sure. I personally, um, no, I've always had self-doubts. Yeah, I definitely doubt myself. Um, but I can't think of any particular sort of crises Um, there was one point um, that perhaps emphasizes the importance of having people around you who you can connect with. But at the very tail end of my time in Germany, in order to transfer back to the States, I got kind of stuck in this weird situation that it's hard to describe, but it's a kind of unique military sort of thing where I had orders to do one thing and orders to do something else. And so I got stuck between literally the set of orders telling me of what I'm supposed to be doing. And I ended up being kind of abandoned in this unit for a couple of weeks where I didn't know anybody at all. I didn't have anything. Everything had already been shipped back to the US. All I had was a bunk in a room full of strangers who were doing their own thing and had nothing to do with me. And so I didn't have my squad leaders. I didn't have anybody from my platoon or my company to communicate with. I didn't have cell phones yet, so I couldn't call my parents or friends. And the only thing that got me through that period was listening to music on my Sony Walkman, mainly the U2. I think it's the Boy album, kind of over and over again. And in that particular case, I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was sort of survive mentally, get through this period, and then I was on a plane and back in the States, and things were okay once again. So I don't know exactly how that particularly works out. There have been moments where I was wondering, especially in PhD, where you're working with all of these very high-level people who are experts in their fields, and wondering, am I with these guys? Can I do this particular level of work? And it's the classic imposter syndrome, I believe is the term. And I certainly experienced that, but gradually learned that most of those people were not perfect, and they tended to be very narrow experts. They were experts in one particular thing, and I could likewise. Many of us could be experts in one particular thing. So I was able to get through that. So in other words, I don't really have a lot to offer in the way of personal experience of that, beyond to say that you have people around you, even if it doesn't seem like it right at that moment, who want to help, who are willing to help, who know you, whether it's a friend or a parent or a grandparent, or just the 1-800 24-hour online help person who has some skills in mental health and behavioral health, who can help connect you with what you need. That those are available, and that sometimes all we have to do is reach out to somebody, for somebody to grasp us and help lift us out of these problems. You don't have to do it alone. So for what it's worth, that's what I have to offer.
Oh, I think that's important to highlight, and it's it's we all overcome our own struggles, right? And gauging what struggle is worse than another it's all speculative. It's perspective. So it's going through and even having a trial of being separated from the people is still something you have to overcome, And I mean, you had enough mental fortitude to not go and make that a negative. It seems like you took your time and you took control of the situation and did what you could, made it the best you could. And listening to music is a wonderful thing. I
Yeah.
think people use that a lot for, well, I know people use that a lot for getting through tough times, and the arts, that's why understanding history and kind of the people that we come from is important. Where we come from a long line of people that danced together and sang together and socialized, and we lose a lot of that when we uh secluse and recess back to a place where you don't want to open up. So keeping an open door, so to speak, for people to be able to check in on you and show that genuine care is very important.
Absolutely.
Now, Tom, what's your favorite classes to teach and why?
People ask that all the time. I don't really. I'm very lucky in that I get to teach a bunch of different classes, and each one of them has something special or good about it that I enjoy sharing with students. Some instructors somewhere get stuck teaching the exact same two classes over and over and over and over again forever. So I have that to my advantage. Probably the easiest class I have to teach, and I say that in a way that it's really quite pleasant, is the U.S. History to 1877. What is History 108? U.S. History at Feather River College. And part of it is because the best history tends to be a story of some sort. And so you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have to have characters. There has to be a development. Something exciting at the end has to occur, and something has to be resolved. And that class, because of the time period it covers, really has a really nice narrative to it. You start with the pre-colonial period, Native Americans in North America, and what's going on in Europe and what's going on in Africa. And then over the course of the first half of the semester, you bring them together, you found colonies, those colonies begin to develop. And by the middle of the semester, the midterm exam, you've got the Revolution and the Constitution. And so you can kind of see all of these lines coming together and forming this moment when all men are created equal and we're going to create a government based on we, the people. And so that's like the first season, and we have our season finale, and then you begin a new season with the early republic, and you sort of gradually build up. What are the tensions? What are the problems here with this new country? It's expanding. It has this problem with slavery. Should slavery expand, or should we try and get rid of it? And that, of course, evolves into the Civil War, which is this massive cataclysm, and that's somewhat resolved by the Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War. But then that kind of falls apart and sets you up for the next season. And I can just basically walk in to class any day and just jump into that story. There's so much there, and it's so wonderful to highlight these different characters and bring in the different documents and look at the conflicts and illuminate this particular story is just fun and easy. I think that's what I like.
No, that's awesome, and that kind of makes me wonder: have you had any moments where you considered quitting? And I think I know my answer, but at the same time, it always has to be asked because teaching's a tough job.
Yeah, it is. There are like literal moments in the instant where, I'm reading a paper where this, student has plagiarized Wikipedia again, or now of course they're turning in things written by ChatGPT, and I go, why am I bothering to do this if everyone's just going to go to Wikipedia or OpenAI and get their information from that? But it very quickly passes. And I try and resolve that particular issue with the student, and I'm back on track. There were moments in the past when there were administrative problems outside of the classroom with the institution, where I was thinking, I don't know if I should be here. I still want to teach, and I really want to teach at the community college level or something very close to it. But I maybe don't want to be here in this place. But luckily, those have all been resolved. So I think the answer that you were probably thinking, no, is my answer. That generally speaking, I love what I do. All aspects of it, except for the grading. The really tedious grading is really boring. I like talking to students and communicating with them about material. But otherwise, I have the best job in the world, and why would I quit?
That's great. No, I love to hear that kind of thing, because having passion for what you do is part of the end game of having a good career. I feel like that's where you want to be. You're where you want to be, and that makes me happy to hear.
Yeah. And I think most of the professors at Feather River College would probably say something quite similar to that.
Yeah, I know I've talked to Daryl Swarm before personally a lot, and he was one that I really admired for his positivity. He could go in and he'd always have a really good thing to say, and a positive to say from the learning experience, and that helped me as a student learn, like, that these people are really here to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good.
What kind of person would you recommend teaching as a career to? I know that's probably really tough, but
I think there's no one kind of person who can be a teacher or a good teacher or enjoy teaching. It depends on the discipline. Yeah, I'm not really that much of a people person. I know that's kind of bizarre. I have terrible public speaking anxiety. But of course, for a living, I have to go and stand in front of people and talk. And I have to try and make connections with the students and make sure that they're getting the information and understanding it. So I'm able to overcome that. And I think there are a lot of instructors like Daryl, for example, who really do enjoy being with people and in crowds and doing this sort of thing. But I think you have to, love the topic that you're going to be teaching, and love being able to talk about it, and present it in such a way that people can grasp it, and put it to use, whether you're doing nursing or you're teaching the Chinese language or history or electronics or air conditioning repair. I've taken a lot of different classes of different sorts. One of the first things I did the second year I was at Feather River College, I took a course on draft horse driving, because the college is able to offer that. And I've been around horses. I've petted their noses and I've ridden them a couple of times. But it was really cool to be in a totally different environment and with a completely different kind of teacher who's doing this hands-on, here's what you do, here's Here's how you treat this animal. Watch as I do this. It was really neat to see that, because that person was teaching in a completely different fashion than I do, like a totally different topic to a completely different group of people. And they were still teaching. They were still enjoying what they were doing. They had the added advantage that they get to be around cute and amazing animals. That's something I get to do unless I'm visiting the horse stables. But I think that's what it comes down to. At least for high school and above, the topic that you're going to be teaching has to be something that you love. And to give you just one counter to that, I took algebra in, I don't know, sophomore as a high school. And the person who was teaching it was the one person the warm body that the school district could put in the classroom. And it was the women's volleyball coach.
Oh, man.
And one thing on earth that he hated, and it was math. And he did not care at all. And that whole year was just a complete waste of time. And I'm like, why are you even here? Why are you teaching this? You hate it. You hate us.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it really comes down to.
No, that's good points. I think you're absolutely right, though. There's different styles of teaching. I mean that's apparent. A lot of people realize that, but it is when you actually see it in action and you hear it, and that ties those to the education and the experience together. It shows like with like horse trainers, there's a huge experience aspect to that education. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the hands-on, you didn't really get the education necessary to train horses.
Precisely.
So it's really cool that relationship between that the class and the career, really. Like college is a stepping stone for most people that go through it. They come in and they go out. So you want them to feel comfortable going out. And I think that's the best aspect, is having those chances to dive into something outside of your major, maybe, and or just talking to people in passing. And you can learn a lot out of doing that.
Oh yeah.
And this. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that if somebody has a vague interest in teaching, there are opportunities to teach without becoming a quote full-time teacher. That might allow you to use those skills that you have and pass them on to other people. At the community college level, a lot of part-time instructors, particularly in areas where you have where you need a lot of experience, where it's not necessarily book learning, the trades and the technical professions, you have people who are experts in their fields and who are really good at something, and they can have the opportunity to teach one class a semester where they teach that one thing, and they're really good at that one thing, and they're really good at teaching that one thing. And that can be really rewarding for them. Not so much in the way of money. You get paid about $3,000 for a semester of teaching a class, but it can be a lot of fun. And I've taken classes from people who are professionals out in the world doing things, who are just teaching part-time for fun and passing on those skills and that interest to other people.
Oh, that's a great point to bring up. I'm glad you did. There's definitely variation in how much commitment there is, and yeah, that proves that there's teachers in every field. Even outside of college, having an open mind to finding mentors is not a bad idea when you're lost. We all need mentors. We all need inspiration. And it's something I like to quote. Is Steve Jobs with one of his last speeches, where he's talking about you need to have faith in something, karma or direct faith, like you need something to to have that motivation to move forward. So if you're gaining connection, that's in itself motivating you to keep pursuing that connection. So it's a positive in my eyes.
Yes, very much so.
Now, something I'm curious is how many people come to your class and leave learning more about history than they realized they would coming in? And on top of that, would you consider history as an important factor to the educational career? And even if it's outside of someone's major?
I don't know how much my students learn about learning history or how much of an interest I have students who come up to me at the end of the semester going, I thought this class was going to be really boring and stupid. I've really never liked history, but this was really good. I like the way you teach. Other people don't like the way I teach and don't see the point of history, and I'm not able to make that connection. It's funny when occasionally students will, I'll either run into them because they're visiting Quincy years later, or they'll email me and say, hey, do you remember me? I took this class from you, blah, 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 blah. And they'll be like, this history class was really key for me. It opened my eyes to, a broader field of study. It built up my interest in particular topics. They didn't necessarily go on and become history majors, but it was useful to them in understanding the world around them and helping them build up their writing skills or their way of looking at things. So I'm always hoping that students leave class and end up sitting someplace and watching CNN, or they see something on social media, or they're watching a movie and they're going, oh, hey, I know about that. That's that event in 1812, or that's this thing that I learned from Dr. Heaney's class. I wonder if, and they want to learn a little bit more, and they, look it up and read something on Wikipedia, and that makes them look at something else. And then pretty soon they're reading a book, or they're watching a cool video on YouTube about the topic. And hoping to just sort of create a general interest in the idea that the past matters, that it shapes the world around us and what we do as individuals and as a society.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great. And having the open perspective when seeing social media today, especially, is important. And then that's a passive. Well, I would say passive. It's really more active role that you have to have with interpretation these days. Is I like to consider we're kind of in the information age where we have so much information put onto us that if you don't have a capacity limit, you're just going to be in absorption mode all the time, and that's not positive. It's really taxing, So when you're able to pick through and filter, oh, I learned a little bit about this, and this course helped me to decipher, like, I need to go to the source. I need to actually do my research if I want to know more about this, and instead of wasting my time.
Yeah, and we have these machines that we carry around with us that give us access to all of the knowledge that human beings have acquired in the past few thousand years. And there are some really, really good sources out there, and that aren't necessarily historical or written by a historian. There's a whole series of YouTube videos that one of my sons turned me on to, called Oversimplified History. It's very cartoonish, but it gets into the details and just does a fantastic job. And occasionally I've thought, well, instead of doing an hour-long lecture on this, I'll just show this 15-minute cartoon in the class. But I figure I probably should do something a little more mature and adult-oriented than a cartoon. But there's so much out there to learn from, whether it's history or geography or biology or anything else. Um,
Well, and sometimes being simple, having simplicity is the most effective role. Like being able to break things down so you could explain it to like a child or younger person, like that. There's value in that because there's universal connection there.
Yeah, and being able to narrow it down is important because we're being bombarded all the time, and if you're you can be overwhelmed by how much information there is out there, and just kind of relax and investigate what is of interest to you that makes you go, I want to know more, or why is that way, or how does that thing work?
Absolutely. Yeah, and inquiring and having curiosity for things is valuable.
Yeah,
Keeps the
absolutely.
day fresh. And on that point, actually, this is a great lead into what inspires you to keep teaching the same courses? Has Feather River College given you more confidence in life to seize the day through teaching?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is the fact that you have the school year, I think, and you have the semesters. It is, on the one hand, the same thing over and over and over and over again. I'm going to keep doing this until I retire. So 6 to 10 years from now, maybe earlier if my brain starts giving out. But each semester, each year is like something new. It's like, okay, I tried teaching about the causes of the Civil War using that thing this semester. That didn't work out. Next semester, I'm going to try something different, and it's going to work. Or maybe it works a little bit better, or it's worse, and I try something else. There's, as an instructor, I see every semester as another opportunity to approach something differently, or to bring in a new source, or a new video, or a new game, something to try and get through to students. So there's that aspect. Another aspect is we have a great community of teachers and administrators and staff at Feather River College. And I feel extra lucky to teach there. If I was teaching back at Orange Coast College, I would be one of, I think they have like 100 and something full-time instructors in history.
Oh, wow.
It's just completely insane. They have, the school is so huge, and nobody knows one another, even in the department. Whereas here, if I'm having trouble with a student, or I feel like a student is in some sort of crisis, or maybe they could use a little help, I can contact the English instructor. I could go, hey, this person's on this team. I'm going to go talk to their coach. And, hey, coach, is there something going on here? Oh, yeah, they have this issue or that issue, or maybe you could do this. And so we all fail, and I certainly fail. I feel like I failed all the students who fail my class. That, I wasn't able to make a connection with them, or I missed something that would have made it possible for them to pass the class. But we have so many, on campus, we have so many different ways of trying to make that connection. And there's always next semester. If a student fails the class this semester, they'll be there next semester, and maybe I can make that connection. Maybe I can integrate them more into the class or into the material, and make that connection to help them be successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then lastly, there's always stuff about history going on that I'm constantly reminded every day that I get up and look at, go on TV or look at social media, and I'm going, oh, people need to know more about that. Or I didn't know about this. Here's something I can use in my classes to talk about this particular topic. That history is always relevant. It doesn't stop being relevant. And so there's always new ways of looking at it, new ways of approaching it, or just new crises that need to be examined. And that might make people more interested than they were last semester.
Well, I think that's wonderfully phrased. There's a lot to say there, and I suppose that's how you seize your day, right? Is you use this experience that you've gained to help find better ways to interpret how to explain what you're conveying in a way that's entertaining and manageable.
Yes, and accessible, and is hopefully going to be the hook that catches students and connects them to the material in the class.
Oh, I really think that's admirable, and I commend you for doing all this. We need good teachers like that, and I feel like I speak for a lot of people in saying that.
Thanks.
Thank you, and sincerely, it's great to have community colleges with people who are willing to be there and actually be a resource. It's a sacrifice, it is a sacrifice, and that doesn't mean you're necessarily not enjoying what you're doing, but you have to stay in the town, you have to stay on a campus, you're essentially with the students. Where the students go, you go. So that takes a lot of courage to have the dedication to do.
Yeah, it does mean sometimes answering emails at 11 o'clock on Saturday night, but that's part of the job, and that's I love, to some extent, I love that it's all encompassing and all absorbing. Everything I do is somehow connected back to my job.
It makes it for quite the story, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So going into some of these documented games you were programming, like, did you I know that you were saying you learned some basic when you were younger, but did you learn any other computer development courses through your college experience?
I took a number of classes in Fortran, a little bit of Pascal, and Basic, and all three of those languages are basically like Latin. They're basically dead now, which is fine. And I've been playing computer games continuously since then, or almost continuously, and I've tried to use board games in the classroom, and sometimes they've been very successful. I had one class where the whole class just completely got into it, and it was just remarkable to watch them engage with one another and engage with the material. And then the exact same game in the next semester died. Nobody cared. Nobody was interested. Nobody wanted to engage in it at all. And I was just like, what the heck is this? And that's part of teaching. Every semester you get a new group of students who are coming from different backgrounds, and it's a different collection of people. And so I tried a couple more times with in-class games, but they tend to take a lot of time. You have to teach the students how to play the game. You have to practice playing the game. Then you have to set up the game. And depending on the different kinds of games, they can be very time absorbing. And so I started thinking, this playing this game is not worth the 2.5 weeks. Even if students are finding this interesting and it has some connection, there's just too much other stuff that has to be covered. We can't give up all of this for this class. So I started thinking, well, if I had some of these games that were somewhat accessible online so that people could play them anytime outside of the classroom, the games could enforce the rules. You wouldn't have to know all the rules to know how to play the game. The game could sort of play with you. That would be an accessible way of kind of introducing this and putting students in the place of the time and going, okay, why are things happening the way they're happening? Oh, it's because people are making these decisions. There are these resources. This is the map on which these events take place. There's all sorts of different aspects of learning involved in a history game. So I started thinking about that. But I'm not very good at programming. I didn't know any programming languages. And then I stumbled across this one system called the Twine system, Twine, which is designed to just be a way of doing text games. I don't know if you've played any text games.
Yeah.
They're literally just text. You're in a room with a troll. What do you do? Pick up sword, kill troll. That it was designed for that sort of thing where it's just text describing where you are and you go into this room and you do that. And I started saying, hey, we could play with this. And I've got a couple of activities that do just that, that are, it's all text. It's not really a game. You're just in command as George Washington in 1776, or you're working with President Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s in the White House. And it's all text, and you kind of go through them like a game. But Twine also has these other aspects to it that allow you to program it further and further. And it was one of those things where I started out going, hey, can I do this? Oh, that's cool. Can I do this? That's cool. Can I do this? Oh, yeah, I could do this.
That's really neat.
Yeah, all of this I could be doing in JavaScript. But JavaScript is huge. It's completely insane. Have you done any programming?
Yeah, I've done a little CSS, HTML, and I dove into very, very basic Java. And because of how massive it is, I kind of got intimidated at the time when I was studying. So it's something I need to go back into because I actually actively want to I want to do game development.
Yeah, and if you're doing online games, then JavaScript is probably where you're going to be going. And it's not assembly language, but it's fairly low level language, and you have to do all of this prep work just to kind of get to a certain point.
Oh yeah, no, it's very hands-on. There's
Twine,
a lot of errors that can happen.
yeah, and Twine has a language called Sugarcube. You can look this up, Twine.
Oh, I've heard about Sugarcube.
And it's a programming language, and you have to learn it. And I've been working at it now for several years. But it allows you to do very easily what would take forever in JavaScript, because literally you write Sugarcube, you run the translator, and it creates a giant JavaScript file that does everything you want.
That is super cool. I'll have to read into that more.
And there's a lot involved. If you want to do something like the latest game I'm working on, it's 16,000 lines of CSS and Sugarcube. But you can do a lot. And if I was writing this in JavaScript, I would have given up a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it allows you to accomplish a lot. Basically, you're telling, hey, JavaScript, I want to do this thing. And JavaScript kind of goes and writes itself.
That's a genius idea.
Yeah, which, by the way, this summer I started playing with OpenAI because it's very knowledgeable and effective in programming.
Oh yeah.
And I could say, okay, I need to do this thing in Sugarcube. Can you please write me a small program that'll do this? Sure, here you go. And 50% of the time it would work. But eventually I learned how to put that to work. And the two of us, I'm doing the big picture and I'm writing all this code. And then when I run into something really tedious or very, very difficult, I can go to GPT to get a little help. And it will help me generate the code that I need to do. So that's where I ended up in this. Each project just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But Twine Sugarcube allows you to access a lot of this programming without really knowing the really nuts and bolts down below.
Oh, that's a really cool thing to learn about, and to have um, almost like a shorthand device, like a shorthand interpreter, um, is powerful for projects like this. I didn't know they created something. Um, like I've heard about Sugarcube, but I didn't know its function. There's so many languages, so
Yeah.
it's a little intimidating to understand which one to learn about first. But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've got the original Twine language, and then there's Harlow, Sugarcube 1, Sugarcube 2, and then there's at least two other really obscure ones. But on YouTube, there are a number of people who have done tutorials on how to create games using Sugarcube or Twine or Harlow, and they're really good tutorials, and it's really enjoyable to kind of follow along and say, oh, I'm going to do this, and then you write the code and it happens. The thing that you had in your brain appears on your screen, and you get that little endorphin rush. So yeah, I would suggest checking that out. And if you need, I could send you some links to various possibilities.
yeah, I would love to see some of those links. I'm more than happy to look into that. I've been really considering, like, down the road, hosting podcasts with different tutorials on coding and things like that. Once I start to learn more myself, I'd like to help people understand, like, at least good resources and places to go for things like this. So I would really appreciate that, actually. Thank
Sure.
you for the offer.
Of course.
Would you consider yourself an avid gamer, and would you recommend any games to our audience?
Yes, I am an avid gamer, although ironically, um, I think I now spend way more time programming than actually playing any games. But that's okay. That's where I am. Um, I'm not sure if there are all sorts of, for example, history games out there, and I think that history games are very useful. There's a whole movement in academia towards gaming and incorporation of games in teaching, and particularly in history, because it's so engaging for students and it sort of allows them to learn while having fun, or at least not realizing that they're being forced to learn. But at the same time, I'm not sure if there's particular games that make you go, here, play this game and you'll learn all about this particular topic, or this is the perfect game to start. There's a game which has been very well regarded, Twilight Struggle. This is a board game of the entire Cold War from 1945 to 1991. And one player is the American player, one player is the Russian. You have a map of the entire world, and you take turns playing cards, trying to influence the board. And it's basically kind of the domino theory brought to life on a board game, but it's very accessible. It's not like there's a zillion things to do. Each turn you play one card and you choose to do this, or that. And you do that thing, and it's the other person's turn. So there's very little downtime. There's not a lot to learn to start playing. It immediately draws you into the narrative of the Cold War. And one of the overarching things is you can come into conflict with one another. But if that conflict grows too large, you have a little clock that's ticking downward. And when you reach a certain point, thermonuclear war is triggered and you both lose.
That's
so
really
you want to avoid doing that. So you're constantly in conflict with one another and trying to not let the conflict get completely out of hand. So it's got this great map that gives you geography. It's got the events on the cards. It's very accessible. It's really a pretty cool game, and it's very well regarded. It's one of the best-selling, quote, war games out there. The game that I'm working on now is called Churchill. It's a 3-player game designed by oh God, I can picture his face. It'll come to me. Big game designer. One person is playing Churchill, one person is playing Franklin Roosevelt, and one person is playing Joseph Stalin. And you're trying to work together to win World War II and defeat Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. And this is played out on a big, pair of maps of the world. But you're also trying to gain a leg up on one another. Develop atomic weapons, capture more territory, or other changes that are going to give you a position of dominance in the post-war period. And it plays out really remarkably well. It's a series of conferences. There were these many conferences where the different heads of states came together, Tehran and Yalta and Potsdam in particular, in 1943, 1944, and 1945. And you play the game by playing the cards of different representatives of your government, trying to argue about different issues with one another in order to get a leg up on your competition. And so it's this interesting game about World War II and about winning World War II, but also setting you up for the post-war world and the Cold Wars, and the interplay between these different individuals during the war.
It's got a really cool foundation to it. I like the premise.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, and the same designer has gone on and designed a number of similar games where there's one that I've thought about using for my world history class, but it's really too complicated, called Pericles. There are 2 teams. One is the Athenians, one is the Spartans, and it's the Peloponnesian War. And both of those teams are made up of 2 people who have different perspectives, and they play cards against one another, trying to come up with what their policy should be for their country, their city-state versus the other one. And it's the basic idea of it isn't too complicated, but everything kind of spirals out of control, which is part of the fun of the game. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. You're fighting, you're a Spartan, arguing with other Spartans about how to fight the war. And then whatever you come up with, that's how you're fighting the war with Athens.
Oh man.
Versa. And it's pretty fascinating, but a little too involved, a little too complicated for use in the classroom.
Well, that's really cool that you have those recommendations. I'm gonna give all those a look personally. I love board games, so and anything engaging with like historical events, I'm all over. That's the kind of reading and style I like.
Yeah. Same here.
And you know what? Speaking about reading, I actually wanted to ask, what's some of the great ways reading's improved your life, and why would you recommend someone to pick up the habit?
Well, on the one hand, reading opens an entirely new world. You can discover things you didn't know, learn things, or you could just visit places that you can't visit because they're too far away or they don't exist at all, and learn stories about people who are different from you, or in some cases, they may be just like you, but are experiencing something amazing or terrible and struggling through these things or achieving something. When I was in 1st and 2nd grade, I really struggled with reading. I mean, so much so that I remember, recognizing all my peers are ahead of me and being told by my parents, you have to practice, reading these 3-letter words because you're behind in reading. And then late in my 2nd grade class, I had one of those classic elementary school teachers who was just, like an angel who tried to provide you with everything you needed to succeed in life. And we had this little programmed system of reading. You didn't read books. You were handed a card, and it might have a couple hundred words of some sort of story on there. And one of the very first things I was able to actually read and comprehend was this little 2-paragraph description of the explosion in 1917 in Halifax, Canada, of a ship that was carrying artillery and gunpowder. And just the description, as a very early reader struggling with, comprehending words of the massive destruction caused by this one explosion in an instant that leveled part of the city of Halifax and launched a ship's anchor, 2 miles away, and the ship was completely vaporized so that it didn't exist anymore. That just kind of switched on something. I was like, oh my God, this reading thing is really cool. I just saw in my mind this, granted, horrible thing, but amazing, that I didn't know about. That was, right here in front of me. And I went to the next card, and I could point out, well, this was the moment where I fell in love with history because I started picking out all the history cards to read. But, reading opens up a whole new world, and just so many different things. But it's a skill. I had a mentor at Sac State who said, if you want to write, if you want to be a good writer, you have to write every single day, and you have to be disciplined about it. And it could be a letter that you're writing to somebody. It doesn't have to be an essay or short story, but you got to write something. And so I'm sure the same thing is true for reading. You have to read something, and something that engages you. Reading things that are not interesting is boring. We recently got a new car, and new cars have all of these crazy new features that I can't even wrap my brain around. So I've been trying to read the manual, and it is so boring and pointless. It's really tedious.
Well, and that's a good lead up to our next question, which is, are there any genres of reading that you have a hard time diving into personally?
Apparently car manuals are a big thing. Oddly enough, my favorite thing to read right before I go to bed, because I find it so relaxing, is reading game manuals.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it could be for a video game or a board game. It doesn't really matter. Something about reading, you have to do this, and then you do that, and this happens, and I don't know. There's something about it that calms me down. I'm not sure if there, I think that being said about manuals, a lot of technical writing. I have trouble with reading technical stuff about things. I literally make it wrong. And other mechanical elements. Almost anything trying to do math is going to drive me crazy, which is funny because I sort of like doing word problems. I know I don't like doing math, but I kind of like doing word problems, which is kind of an odd thing. The other thing is, and maybe this is kind of counter to what you're trying to accomplish, is audiobooks and podcasts. And this is Benjamin's fault, my son. He started doing audiobooks. He signed me up took advantage of my Amazon account and signed us up for Audible and started doing all of these books, most of which were Warhammer 40K.
Oh my gosh, of course.
But he picked out some good stuff as well. But there were always a few of these credits left over, and I was like, I don't really want to read this book, but I'd like to know a little bit more about this book. And so I would get that credit. And I listen to them when I'm running or walking or stuck in the car. If I'm in the car by myself, I've got an audiobook going. And obviously, I'm not learning as much as I would if I'm sitting there reading the book and taking notes. But audiobooks are so great. I just feel like I'm, transported, and I learn so much, even if I'm not learning everything I should. Right now, I'm listening to a 20-hour book on the Battle of Hue in Vietnam by U.S. Marines in 1960. And it's one of the great things is it switches back and forth between both sides. Of course, the perspective is well documented. The author, it's the same author who wrote Black Hawk Down.
Okay.
And he's interviewed a lot of these Marines. He's read their letters, their diaries. And then he's also read and interviewed people in the Viet Cong and who are in the NVA. And it just, brings to life this cataclysm in this city where all of these different people are there for these different reasons. Some of them are committed to a revolutionary Vietnam that they want to drive out the foreigners and the South Vietnamese and establish a unified communist utopia. That didn't quite work out, but you can sense their devotion to and their patriotism, and then there's the Marine who was really gung-ho and he joined the Marines because he wanted to be in battle, and now he's like, okay, I've had enough battle, I want to go home now. Or the person who enlisted thinking that they were avoiding going to Vietnam and suddenly find themselves literally in the worst battle in the war in Vietnam. And just all of these different things, the leaders who are doing well as leaders and the leaders who are failing, and the terrible things that happen to human bodies in battle, and the people caught between all of this. It's really epic. And it's giving insights into the war in Vietnam, insights to the motivation and leadership on both sides, the horrible nature of war, especially in an urban environment. There's just so much going on. And the author has written a great book, and the person reading it has done a fantastic job. They're basically an actor, and they're bringing all of this to life. So even if you don't like reading, audiobooks are awesome. And there's pick a topic that you have some vague interest or you want to know more about, and grab a couple of those.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Excuse me. But that's something that I like is listening. I think that's why I've kind of assumed I have more ADD than I realized, because I've always struggled with the putting the book in my hands and actually the process of sitting down and staying still to read that book, because I like to multitask. I've always been that way, and it doesn't mean I don't slow down to read certain things, but my span of interest is a lot wider when someone sits down in essence with me and explains or breaks down the information that's given. It registers easier in my mind, and I can't really explain why. It's just kind of always helped me. So I know for a lot of people, it's we all learn differently, right? And,
yes, absolutely.
I think that's a wonderful thing. Whenever anyone recommends like podcasts or audiobooks, I'm all over it. It's been a life changer to me, especially with philosophy. things like philosophy, where they're hard topics to break down on a page, when they're living and they're in an active conversation, it's a lot easier to find relative similarities in what's being perceived and displayed. And I think that's wonderful. It's a great tool we have nowadays, and it shouldn't lessen the value of a book, though. And people should respect authors and the work that they do and editing things down, and it's an art at the end of the day. Sharing information is an art.
Yes, absolutely. An art and a skill, and occasionally a little bit of a science, perhaps.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any book recommendations or websites, media experiences you'd recommend? And if so, you can send me a list too. We can put them below if you'd rather do that, and so you have time to kind of break down a list you'd like to share.
I don't have any particular books. I'm always getting new ones. I tend to get into a rut where I'm like, this topic is really fascinating and I want to learn everything about it. So I went through reading or listening to like 4 biographies of Winston Churchill. So my brain's full up on that.
You're full of the Churchill.
Yeah, exactly. And a few months ago, it was the War of 1812, which, as a historian, both, somebody who has an interest in military history and has to teach the War of 1812, I've got a fairly good grasp of, but it's like a weird war that fought in all sorts of different places by people who don't quite know what they're doing. So I read a whole bunch of books on that. I discovered that the best books on the War of 1812 are actually U.S. Army history books. There was a series written. I think there are 5 books, and it's available for free on PDF. Going into not only the big global situation and then the regional situation, but obviously the battlefield level, and why the war went so badly for the Americans. That's fascinating. I've also World War II is always a thing that I'm interested in. I think for a lot of people, somehow World War II is the thing that makes them go, oh, history, look at this.
Oh yeah.
And I recently discovered James Holland, who he's a
What was that, Tom?
books. He's got just
Hold on.
40.
You cut off for about 10 seconds there.
Oh, sorry. So I'm talking about James Holland. He's a British historian, a prolific writer. He's written a zillion books now. And I have been reading some of his books. They're just because they're engaging. Listening to either podcasts that include him, or he occasionally does conventions. So there are YouTube videos of him just talking about things, and he's just a fascinating person to listen to about World War II. He's got this great English accent that just makes you want to listen to him. And he's done, there's a museum, the Tank Museum in England, has a whole host of all of these videos. They do almost daily videos about their tank collection. And he has these in-depth studies of individual tanks that are this combination of history and battle, but engineering and social history and all sorts of stuff. And he's just so engaging. So if you just Google James Holland and whatever you see, start watching the video, start listening to whatever he's talking about.
Absolutely. No, that's
yeah.
a great recommendation. I'll check them out too. I'll make sure to write that in the description for the viewers too. And on that note, like, do you have any closing words for the audience? Is there anything you wanted to get off your chest before we wrap things up?
Hey, history is important. Even if we individually, you could get through your entire life without knowing any history. That would be just fine. But an understanding of history will help us understand the world around us and how to make decisions about the world around us and what we should be doing to either improve society or to prevent bad things from happening. And don't get hung up on these weird political conflicts. Don't learn about that. That's woke, right? History needs to be understood. You can't just ignore parts of it because it upsets you, or you think that it might upset you or might upset somebody else. And if you don't like history and you don't study history, don't talk about it. Just go on with your lives ignoring history. But if you want to get involved, learn history. Don't be afraid of it. There you
I
go.
think that's wonderful. Yeah, no, that's that's true. Having transparency to understand if it's not your thing, it's not, something you have to be ashamed of. But there's a lot of powerful ways history can push you in a direction that is in the present and in the moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to wrap this up. And it's truly been a pleasure having you on, Tom. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know a lot of people are going to appreciate hearing this perspective. I know a lot of my friends are personally going into universities right now. So there's a lot of tension in the room, so to speak, on how that's going to go. And I'm sure hearing this is going to help them through.
I'm so glad to be here and be a part of this and contribute whatever I can to students and future students out there.
Well, I hope that we can maybe meet along down the road another time and have you on again and maybe have a discussion along a certain frame of history. If that's something you're open for, we would love to have you visit again.
Sure, I would love to do that.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that. And truly, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all the viewers for joining us today. And this has been the World Networking Podcast, and we will see you next time. I really appreciate you guys stopping by today, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. Dr. Thomas Heaney is a real pleasure to have on the show, and he's very knowledgeable about different eras and things and settings that just the average person doesn't usually have the knowledge to dive into, and I really think it adds that unique layer to the discussion at hand, and the experiences that he's had have shaped how he views life, and I think that's really cool that I'm able to be a part of that, and being part of the show, able to share this with you, the viewer. So I appreciate you being here, and I hope you guys have a great day.